Hello and welcome to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. I have the Amazing Spider-Man, and I also have on my awesome little nano suit from the Avengers Endgame. I actually bought this off the internet, and so I wear it every once in a while. It's a little cold here now because it is December, end of November, early December as I'm recording this. We actually just had a little bit of snow where I live, so that was actually kind of cool. So today we're going to do part 2 of the Spider-Man retrospective. When we last left off, we had been discussing the Amazing Spider-Man, or not the Amazing Spider-Man, but the Spider-Man trilogy. So we did the original trilogy, and I kind of talked about, how they got Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst and all those people to kind of run and do this amazing trilogy. But the box office returns of the third movie were not where Columbia Pictures wanted them. So they put a lot of pressure on Sam Raimi, and he left. And then shortly thereafter, Tobey Maguire left, and then shortly thereafter, Kirsten Dunst said, well, I mean, if we're not going to have Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire, why bother? So the series kind of lapsed for a little while. And Columbia Pictures was not sure what they wanted to do. They were kind of like floating in between. And meanwhile, we know from history that this movie kicked off the MCU. And with Iron Man came a huge push for Marvel, and it was something that nobody had ever seen before. It was a push towards something much bigger than just a series of single movies. So before, we'd had movies like X-Men, we'd had movies like Ghost Rider, Blade, Daredevil, Fantastic Four, Punisher. We had a series of movies that were not connected at all. They were just, they were all in their own little universes. And because they were owned by because other studios had the rights to make those as movies, so nobody was willing to have a full movie. And at the time, Universal had the Hulk, the rights to distribute the Hulk, but he was part of the MCU, and so Universal just kind of didn't make a movie. And so those rights kind of lapsed and went back to Marvel Studios. And that's the reason why they went ahead with the She-Hulk series, is because the rights have finally reverted back to Marvel Studios and Disney. Because at the time, Marvel Studios was trying to be their own entity. They were using studios like Paramount or Universal to release their films, but they were the ones producing everything. And then Disney stepped in and said, well, hey, how about this? We'll give you money, okay? And you can take that money and you can make these movies and you can kind of have your own cinematic universe. Go for it. And they went, oh, okay, yeah, we'll do that. It wasn't like Lucasfilm where they were like, oh, hey, we're going to give you $4 billion for it. It was more a case of they just kind of came in and said, look, how about this? We'll be your parent company, and we'll give you money if you need it, but you're kind of free to pursue your own, your own stuff. And they said, sure. Okay. And then they also had the, at the time, they did the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which you can see here. And then also, they did the Marvel Netflix series, okay? Which Netflix was actually kind of came down from on high and said, well, hey, we've got all these interesting films. Why don't we take those films and we will put them in, or you've got these properties over here, you've got this big cinematic universe over here. Why don't we take the Defenders? The Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist. Oh, and by the way, because he's kind of part of it, we'll take the Punisher too. And they said, go ahead. And they did. And it was excellent. I'm actually kind of excited to see what they're going to do. I know a lot of people, because of She-Hulk, have kind of gone, oh, I don't know, man. I mean, they kind of turned Daredevil into a walking comedian. I'm like, hey, yeah, but I mean, Daredevil was already kind of a womanizer. So was Jessica Jones. I mean, Jessica Jones, she was jumping in bed with a bunch of people. So, I mean, it's kind of been that way. I don't know why it's all of a sudden a problem when it's in She-Hulk, but it wasn't a problem when it was on Netflix. Doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying. So basically, Marvel was creating this gigantic connected universe, okay? And they were like, wow, and Columbia Pictures went, huh. So in about 2010, they said, we're going to do a reboot, okay? Because I think it was about 2008, 2009 that Sam Raimi and everybody else kind of departed from the project. And so they said, okay, we're going to do a reboot, okay? And we're going to hire a brand new actor. We're going to do some stuff. And we're going to bring in some fresh blood, okay? We're going to make a new Spider-Man. And to distinguish it from the original Spider-Man, we're going to call it The Amazing Spider-Man. Cool. So they hired to us here in America, an unknown British actor named Andrew Garfield. Okay? Now we know who he is because this movie, Hacksaw Ridge, he's done a lot since getting this part. But this was kind of the part that launched his sort of American Hollywood career, and not just the British film career that he had, because he had been in a few things in Britain, which is, hey, good for him. I'm glad he made it. So he came over and he did this, and they had, I want to say, was it Martin Sheen? Yes. Yes, it was. Okay. So basically, they decided that they wanted to make this new Spider-Man, okay? And so they hired a whole bunch. I mean, they really got a very good cast in this movie. You had Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. You had Dennis Leary as as Police Captain Stacy. Okay, which I said in the third film, Police Captain Stacy was played by James Cromwell. In this movie, okay, he's played by Dennis Leary. Okay, Dennis Leary, for those of you who don't know, started out his career as a comedian. Okay, he was very much cut from the same cloth as guys like Sam Kinnon, Norm Macdonald. Very in-your-face comedians, right? Their humor comes from making you feel uncomfortable, and then the punchline comes, right? So it's a very in-your-face kind of comedic, a way of doing things, okay? And he had played on the Saturday Night Live. Then he was in a little-known Stallone movie with Wesley Snipes called Demolition Man. I say little-known, of course. But Demolition Man is kind of the one that not many people look to, because it was kind of one of those kooky movies in the 90s where it was like, oh, it's this future like 2036, wow. And here we are as of filming this in 2022 looking at that and going, that's only like 14 years away, dude. But back in the 90s, holy shit, that was so far away. And we really didn't think of it much. Like, we'd look at it and we go, wait a minute, what the hell? But anyway, so Dennis Leary plays Police Captain Stacy. And they introduced a new villain. Well, he'd been introduced in the original trilogy, but in the original trilogy, he was more of a good guy. And that was Dr. Curt Connors. Now, this time, they decided to make Dr. Curt Connors played by Rhys Ifans of Hannibal Rising fame, if you've seen that. He was also... God, I'm trying to remember what else he's been in. He's been in a number of movies. You can look him up. It's spelled like John Rhys Davies. That's his first name, is the middle one. It's R-Y-H-S, and then Ifans. Very good actor. I really, really enjoy his acting. And they actually showed, again, just like they did in the original one, where they had the spider come down and bite him, okay? They did the same thing in this movie. They have him go to Oscorp because Gwen Stacy works at Oscorp as an intern, and he kind of sneaks in to, like, meet her at her job, kind of a thing. And he wants to meet Curt Connors, because in this movie they do something similar to what they did with Tony Stark, which was, when we meet Tony Stark, we find out that, you know, his parents passed away, and he kind of, you know, fell away from everything. So in the beginning of the movie, we actually see him being dropped off at his aunt and uncle's from, you know, by his parents. And then you hear his parents die in like a plane accident or plane crash or something like that. And it's been so long, and I haven't watched the movie in a while, so I might be a little fuzzy on some of the details. So don't sit there and be like, hey, you don't know anything. Blah, blah, blah. I just haven't watched it in a while, okay? So I might be a little fuzzy on the details of what exactly happened. So if you want to leave a comment, be respectful and say, hey, dude, you know, they died in a car crash, or they died in this. But I believe it was a plane accident. I want to say it was a plane crash. Because at this time, when this came out, there was another movie that was really big that year. You might have heard of it. It was called The Avengers. And the Joss Whedon wanted to put the Oscorp Tower in the New York City skyline, so that, you know, as they did some of the flyover shots and as they had some of the wide shots, you'd see the Oscorp building, because there was talks between Marvel Studios and Columbia Pictures about actually putting this Spider-Man in the MCU. But that never came to fruition, because the digital effects at the time when the Avengers came out, which is like right there, they didn't have, they'd already finished all of those digital effects, and they were basically putting it in the can. And by the time they realized that they could have put the Oscorp building in, and they just didn't get around to it, and they didn't, and because they were not handed the models, and they were not done, and everything was done, and so it just didn't happen. Okay, so anyway, getting back to this Spider-Man, so they were trying to create that sort of emotional connection to the character of Peter Parker, the same way that we connect with Tony Stark in Iron Man. Okay, we emotionally connect with him because we think, oh, he lost a parent, you know, so we empathize with that. We have some of that stuff happen. So we're like, okay, we get this. Here it is. Then what you find out is that Richard Parker, okay, who was this Peter Parker's father. And I don't know that much about the Spider-Man character, so if you want to post down in the comments and say, yes, that was actually his father's name in the comics, great. I don't know that for sure, okay? All I've ever known is there's Peter Parker, there's Aunt May, there was Uncle Ben, there was Gwen Stacy, and there was Mary Jane, okay? I know exactly what happened to Gwen Stacy in the original comics, and I know what happened with Mary Jane and Peter Parker in the Prime timeline. They get married, and then in Civil War, Peter Parker unmasks himself, and it puts her in a lot of danger, which is the reason why he didn't want to come and do that, but Tony Stark talked him into it. So basically, getting back to this, okay? So he sneaks into the Oscorp building because he wants to meet Dr. Kirk Connors, because Richard Parker, his father, and Kirk Connors were partners, scientific partners, okay? And they'd been trying to perfect a formula because the Kirk Connors was missing an arm, okay? I'm not sure if he'd had it amputated or if he was born that way. I don't remember the exact reason why, but I just know that he was missing an arm, okay? And I know it was really good blue screen work, or like they had like a green sleeve, thing on the arm stump that he was supposed to have as a stump, and then they cut it out. And the way that he acted, it really looked like he actually did not have a limb in a lot of the shots. And so Peter goes to Oscorp because, number one, Gwen Stacy, and number two, he wants to meet Dr. Kirk Connors. So he meets with Kirk Connors, does a few things, and then he goes and he talks with Gwen Stacy, and then she's like, oh, I have to go really quick. And so he stops off at this one thing and he looks at it, and there's like these machines that are like rotating around, and like there's a bunch of like silk in between, and he's like, this is crazy. So he hits the little button and it opens up, and he walks inside, and he pulls on the little string, kind of like how Bilbo does it in the in Mirkwood in Desolation of Smaug, where he was kind of like, you're kind of like, and then it's like you see all the little things. But this causes all of the spiders that are the ones producing the silk to drop down on him. And let me tell you something, as a mild arachnophobe, woo, that made my skin crawl. Like, I was like, oh, God, glad it's him and not me. I would not be able to do that. I'd be like, hell no, dude. The hell are you trying to pull? And so anyway, it goes in and it bites him. Okay, and then when he gets home, he actually pulls it out, and you see it, and it's dead, and it's kind of hanging on the end of a little string that's connected to the bite. And so he like starts to kind of feel weird, and then pretty soon, like, he starts to hear these like weird sounds, like like. And he's like, what the hell? And like, and so, and it's like he starts hearing these like noises from outside but they're like in the room with him. And then it's like he goes into the bathroom and he starts to try to brush his teeth, and he's like knocking the he like knocks the knob off and like crushes half the sink, and like, because he's got his spider strength, but he doesn't know how to control it, right? Because it just happened to him. So a normal tap of something normally wouldn't damage a sink, but because he's so strong now, it's like just one little tiny tap just like breaks the porcelain sink. And he like tries to squirt, he tries to just push he just tries to push a little bit of the toothpaste, and like ends up like squirting like a whole bunch of toothpaste out of the tube because he doesn't know his own strength. And then it's like he comes out and he sits down at his computer and he starts typing away, and you see him typing, and then pretty soon, because he's trying to find, he's like spider bite, you know, and it shows all these different spiders, and it shows like, you know, black widows, and it shows like Bion Clues, and it shows like all these different other ones, and it shows like some of the different bites, and it shows some of these different things, and then he's typing, and then pretty soon it's like the typing kind of like goes weird. And then he pulls up his fingers and like he's got one of those old like mechanical style clacker keyboards, I call them, and he like pulls it up and it's like all the little keys are like stuck to his fingers, and he's like, and so he ends up in the corner of his room, like literally like I don't know what to do anymore. Like I don't know what the hell is going on. He's got his toothbrush in one hand, he's got, you know, keyboard. You know, he's got keyboard keys stuck to his fingers, and he's hearing all these noises, and then finally he realizes what he's hearing, and he looks over and he sees this one little tiny spider just crawling across a skateboard of his. And it's like, whoa. And so then he goes back to school. He starts learning how to kind of control his strength so that he doesn't, like, you know, bash things, and he doesn't break things. And he goes to school, and Flash Thompson, who in this one is still kind of a bully, he comes up and like or like they're doing something, and he like throws the ball up because he's talking with Gwen Stacy, and like Peter, because like early on I think like Flash like threw the ball and it like hit him in the head, and you know he was kind of embarrassed and all this kind of stuff, and so this time though he's talking with Gwen Stacy, and and it's like the ball comes at his head and he just goes boom, just catches it in his one hand, right, and you know Gwen's like, how'd you do that? And he's like, that's nothing. So he goes down onto the floor. Because Flash Thompson's like, hey man, give me the ball back, dude. Come on, man, give me the ball back, Peter. And he's being just a total douche. And so he goes down there. So Peter goes down there and he's got the ball. And he does this whole thing where he kind of like, you know, holds the ball, you know, out like this. And he's like, you know, here, grab the ball. And then it's like he tries to grab the ball, and, you know, it's like, and Peter would like pull it away from him. And Peter's like doing all these things. And then finally he just holds the ball and he's like, go ahead, take it. Come on, take it. Just take it. And so he grabs, so Flash Thompson tries to grab the ball, he tries to walk away, and he's like, you know, because Peter's got it stuck to his hand, right? And so then he goes and he does this whole dribble thing, and then he jumps up in the air, like super duper high, and then he bashes onto the backboard, and he actually crashes the glass backboard, right? And then he's like just sitting there holding it like, yeah, I'm the man, you know, kind of a thing. And so, you know, and so he kind of gets in trouble for you know, kind of, you know, dunking on Flash Thompson basically, and you know, ruining a backboard and all this kind of stuff. And so he goes out and he starts, and so like there's this scene where he goes out and he starts to realize that he's got these powers now, and that he can hold on to walls, and that he can do these things. And so it shows this whole thing where he's like skateboarding around and like doing all these little tricks and like, you know, doing all this stuff. And so he kind of gets the idea, because there's a bunch of chains, because he's like on like the docks area of New York City. And so he gets this idea where he starts like swinging on these little chains in the thing, and he's kind of like, yeah, that'd be kind of fun. And so then what happens is he comes home, and of course Aunt May, played by Sally Field, and Uncle Ben, played by Martin Sheen, are there, and you know, Uncle Ben is, you know, trying to talk to him about what he did at school, and how, you know, he you know, picked this fight with Flash Thompson, and how he made Flash Thompson look the fool, and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, you know, Peter, you know, you shouldn't really do that kind of stuff, you know. And he gives him the line, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. And, you know, Peter's not having it, because he's like, because he's been hanging out with Dr. Kirk Connors, and because he's got these new powers, he's kind of, he kind of like tells his uncle that, it's like, you're not my father. He's like, I basically raised you, like, I mean, I'm as much your father as your original father. Like, I raised you. And he's like, well, yeah, but you just don't get it. And he walks out and he slams the door because he doesn't, again, he hasn't fully 100% controlled. And when he's a little angry, he kind of forgets. And he walks out of the door and he slams the door and the glass breaks because he's so strong. And, Aunt May and Uncle Ben are like, whoa, like, what the hell? And so he goes off just to kind of go be by himself. And Uncle Ben is trying to find him. And through his kind of spidey sense and super hearing that he has, he hears Uncle Ben. So he decides that he's going to go down. Well, he hears a couple of gunshots. And he comes down and he finds out that Uncle Ben's been killed. And he realizes that it's his fault. And so, of course, there's the obligatory emotional, sadness and all this kind of stuff. And there's this point where Flash comes up to him and starts talking to him, and Peter like reaches out and like grabs onto him like he's just gonna deck the hell out of him. And Flash is like, whoa, I just meant to say, man, I'm sorry your uncle died. And then Peter just kind of breaks down, and then Gwen kind of cradles him, and there's kind of a connection between the two, and you see them connecting, okay, and so you find out that they're trying to find this one guy. And Peter tells the police that he had a tattoo of something on his right wrist. I think it was it wasn't a spider, but it was like a scorpion or something on his wrist. Okay, he had like a little tattoo right here. Okay. And so, basically, Peter goes and decides that he's got these fantastical powers. He might as well use them. So he makes a suit, the Spider-Man suit, and he goes and decides, like, I'm going to go and I'm going to actually, do this. And so he goes to he like basically starts a vigilante cycle of hunting down criminals that look like the man who shot his Uncle Ben, okay? And he creates the little web shooters, okay? So he's got like a little actuator in the palm, and then it goes up to the little, part of it, and then he goes, and he can spray out webs. And so he kind of decides, like, I'm going to, figure out how to, make these things work. And so he, he tests the tension of everything, and he tests all this stuff. And he kind of goes, and so, like, the first, like, I would say, he starts to become Spider-Man, and so he starts to go out and he starts to hunt down these criminals. And so when he first goes and hunts down these criminals, you can kind of see the snark and the sass, because, like, there's one where this one guy, stands there, and, it's like he comes in, and the guy's like trying to do something, and like Peter sneaks into the car behind him, and he's like, dude, I don't really think you really understand about this whole carjacking thing. It's like, and the guy's like, well, what the hell? And he gets out and he's like running around. He's like, what, who are you? And he's like, and then it's like he tries to pull out a gun, and like Peter like kicks it out of his hand, and then it's like the guy's like, so the guy like pulls out a knife, and he's like, I'm gonna cut you, man. And he's like, oh no, you found my one weakness. Oh, it's small, sharp blades. Whack! And then he like hits him in the balls with like a little web ball, and then it's like he webs him up to the thing, and he's like, oh man, I can't believe you fell for that. And so they had a lot more of the snark, a lot more of Peter's normal talking during fighting with this one. And they carried that over into the new Tom Holland, and when we get to those, we'll get to those. And so it was absolutely hilarious. So the upshot of it is that he's going on this kind of a vigilante string, and of course, Police Captain Stacy's like, well, we're trying to hunt down this vigilante dude, and he's trying to do this thing, blah blah blah, and then, in him talking with Kirk Connors, he inadvertently gives Dr. Connors the formula to make it work. But it doesn't work the way that they originally intended. Yes, it does grow back his arm because they use reptilian DNA. But it ends up fundamentally changing his DNA and turning him into a giant lizard. Yes, Lizard Man is in this movie. And he's badass. He's scary as hell, dude. And so it kind of comes to the point where Peter realizes that that they need to capture this lizard because he's starting to hurt people, he's starting to kill people, and he needs to be stopped. So he goes down into the subway, or into the sewer. Sorry, not subway, sewers. And he inadvertently puts his camera up on the wall to try to take some pictures, and then he shoots a bunch of webs and then ties them together, and then he lays there like doing something. I don't remember exactly what he was doing he was like playing a game on his phone or doing something while he was waiting for the Lizard Man to show up. And he ends up fighting the Lizard Man a few times. And basically, there's one really awesome scene, and it was probably the best Stan Lee cameo ever in all the movies. I know he's had some really good ones. I mean, right up there is, we're going to talk about the Civil War one, but this one is probably my favorite just because he's playing a librarian, and in the background he's got these headphones on and he's got music playing, and he's just kind of, he's just going about his business. He's just stamping books and he's putting books away, and in the background there's Lizard Man and Peter Parker, and they're fighting each other, and like Lizard Man like throws a desk, and like Peter Parker like grabs it and like almost hits the librarian. He pulls it back and smacks it with. I mean, it was just hilarious. And Stan Lee said he actually said like this was his favorite one because he absolutely loved the fact that he got to play this like, sort of clueless librarian guy, just kind of going and doing stuff. Another one of my favorites would be in Deadpool, where he plays the DJ in the strip club. But anyway, so the upshot of it is that Lizard Man figures out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, okay, or that Peter Parker knows who Spider-Man's real identity is, okay, and so he decides that he's going to make a little canister full of the mutagen that he used to change himself into a lizard, to change everybody into lizards. Because he considers it the new evolution kind of a thing. And so Peter gets captured by the police. And Police Captain Stacy pulls his mask off and suddenly realizes who it is. And he's like, Peter? And he's like, and he's got his head down because he doesn't want people to see his actual face. And he's like, yes, sir. And he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm trying to stop this guy from destroying half the city, or destroying most of the city. Because he's going to turn everybody into lizards. And we need to stop him. So basically, he ends up giving it back, and then Peter ends up getting accidentally shot. And so he has to put a little bit of the web on his wound to try to, stem, so that he can, kind of run and do all this kind of stuff. And the upshot of it is it had this really cool scene where they swing out all of these little arms up over this one thing, these little crane arms. You've seen them before, like in they've just got the little 3 parts, and so that he can jump. So basically, he's gonna run. He's gonna jump for all he's worth, and then he's gonna swing out and then web the first one, and then swing around it to get a little bit of momentum. Use that centrifugal force to propel him to the next crane, and then to the next crane, and then to the next crane. And so he ends up reaching the building, and he starts fighting the Lizard Man. And Police Captain Stacy comes up, and he starts fighting the Lizard Man, and he ends up getting mortally wounded by the Lizard Man before they're able to shut him down, basically. And Gwen helps Peter, and at that time, he kind of, Captain Stacy, tells Peter, he goes, as he's dying, he says, Peter, I know you love my daughter, and for the sake of that love, I would ask you, don't date her. Don't get involved with her, because if you do, you're going to put her in mortal danger. And so, kind of like at the end of the first Spider-Man movie, he has a choice to make. And he decides that he's going to try to pursue a relationship with her against Captain Stacy's warnings. Okay? And so, because, she's like, Peter, I really like you, and I really want to be with you. And he's like, yeah, I know, and I just don't know if I want to do that. And so they have the funeral for Captain Stacy, and they have some other things happen. And so it was one of those things where you kind of go, oh, okay, that's how they're going with it. Because we get to the second film, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So The Amazing Spider-Man 2, at the end of the first Spider-Man, Chris Cooper, who was in The Patriot with Mel Gibson, he was in the original Bourne Identity, he played Norman Osborn in a tag scene kind of scene at the very end of the first film. He comes up to Kurt Connors and he's like, does Peter Parker know exactly what we've been trying to do? And, Kurt Connors is like, I'm not going to put that boy in any danger. And he's like, oh, you're going to put him in a lot of danger if you don't tell me everything he knows. Kind of all sinister-like. As he played Norman Osborn. Okay. And this was actually the first time that I had heard of Dane DeHaan, the actor Dane DeHaan. The other time that I knew of him was in this very underrated gem, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. We'll need to talk about that one day because it's really good. I actually really enjoy it. But anyway, getting back to The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So it starts with he's Spider-Man now, so he's swinging around, he's doing things, he's being Spider-Man. And saving people, he's doing things. And at one point, you see him save this very meek-looking man who works at Oscorp. And he's played by Jamie Foxx, and I don't remember his name offhand. His name is Max. That's what it is. I don't remember his last name, but his name is Max. Okay, and so Max kind of becomes almost obsessed with Spider-Man because Spider-Man saved him, and he was like, and he asked him his name. He was like, "Hey, Max. Hey," I was like, "Hey, man, what's your name?" He's like, Max, and he's like, because he's got like glasses, and he's kind of meek, and he's like, well, Max, and he's like, okay, Max, I'm gonna need you to, to stay calm, everything's cool, blah blah blah, and he goes away. And we also get to see the guy who plays, I can't remember his actual name, but the guy who's the Rhino. Okay. And it's played by Paul Giamatti. And in this one, he's not in his Rhino suit until the very end, which is kind of sad. But he's like, driving through the streets and like doing all these weird things, and because he's like a bank robber, right? And so during this chase, he, it's like Spider-Man saves this one guy. And of course, that kind of starts the sort of hero worship of this character, where he's like, oh yeah, man, Spider-Man knows my name. Spider-Man knows who I am. Oh yeah, Spider-Man's the man, and all this kind of stuff. And so, and then we find out that Norman Osborn has like this degenerative disease, okay? And he's dying. And we find out that Harry Osborn, played by Dane DeHaan in this movie, is like, he was friends with Peter when they were younger. And then he went to live somewhere else, or he went to a boarding school somewhere else because his dad was, always busy and always this and always that. He has daddy issues, everything like that. There's a whole bunch of that kind of stuff going on, which is okay. I mean, it's kind of how it works. In these stories, it's kind of how it works. Usually that's how these villains start, right? And so, he's sort of starting to do these things, and so he's like, noticing that Peter has all these new powers, and he's like, hey man, how long have you had these things? And he's like, oh, about the 6 months now or whatever. And so they have this cool scene between him and Harry, between Peter and Harry, where they're kind of like sitting on this beach and they're talking, they're throwing rocks and doing all this stuff, and he's talking about how he's doing this and doing that. And then he goes to see Gwen Stacy. And of course, every time he's with Gwen Stacy, he sees Police Captain Stacy, like, standing in the background, like, glaring at him, like, I told you not to do that. Like literally, like, glaring at him. And he's like, ugh, you're really pissing me off. And so there's this kind of dichotomy there where he really wants to be with Gwen Stacy, but then he doesn't because he gave his word to Police Captain Stacy, which he's breaking by being with her. And like, so there's this kind of like tension there, because he keeps seeing Police Captain Stacy, and like he's kind of giving the judgmental stare, and he's just like, like, you told me you weren't going to date my daughter, kind of stare. And so he's kind of torn, like he really doesn't want to. Well, then Max goes to work, and he has to, it's like his birthday, and he has to stay late and work, and he was supposed to go out and meet a couple friends because he was going to celebrate his birthday, or he was going to do something. I don't remember exactly what it was. But he had to go fix this one thing. Well, he's up there and he's trying to fix it, and he ends up like slipping, like something happens and like it startles him, and he falls backwards, and he falls into this tank of like eels, electric eels. And he basically gets shocked to death. And so so they pull him out, and they wheel him into the morgue. And then of course, like with Doc Ock, he's not dead. And electrical things start going awry, bolts of energy start flying to the body. Nobody can figure out what the hell's going on. He starts like shocking all these doctors into nothingness. And he's like, So thus begins his sort of thing where he has these new powers, but he's not sure how they work. And so he's like, so he goes back home, and he's kind of like, oh man, what am I gonna do? I got all this stuff, got this, got these things going on. This is not good. And so begins this sort of like cat and mouse game between him and the Oscorp people, because they realize that he's not dead, and they realize that he's now electrified. And then there's this big like battle between him and Peter in Times Square. And and Peter's trying to calm him down, because it's like the police are trying to shoot him, and he's like, shocking him and doing all this stuff, and Peter kind of jumps in. He's like, hey guys, whoa, whoa. Calm down. Hey, cool out. He's like, yo, buddy, who are you? And he's like, oh, don't you know? I'm Electro. And then it's like he shoots him with some lightning, and he's like, comes back. He's like, oh, okay. He's like, whoa. He goes, hey, hold on, man. And he goes, hey, wait, you look familiar. I know you from somewhere, don't I? And Electro stops for a second. He's like, yeah, you do. You saved my life a couple days ago. And he goes, Max? And he goes, yeah, that's my name. And he's like, hey, Max. Hey, buddy. Hey, let's not do this. Let's you and I go somewhere and we can kind of talk about this stuff. We can kind of talk about what's going on here, and we can try to help you. And he gets him almost calm, and then some shit goes awry, and then, he goes crazy. And then he gets captured by Oscorp, and then he gets let out by Harry Osborn to go out and cause some more havoc, because Harry realizes that his father was putting together some military prototype weaponry. And so he goes in, and he finds out that all of that it's like his father had basically been providing illegal weaponry to people. Okay, kind of double dealing under the table, a little bit like Obadiah Stane in Iron Man was doing with that. And he's like, this is not good. Like, we need to do something a little different here. Okay, you really need to do something a little different. And so basically, at this point, Harry is starting to kind of lose it mentally. Okay, and he basically, I think he takes some serum or something, and so they think, oh yeah, we'll just, we'll shoot him, bam, bam, bam. Well, then he comes up and he basically becomes the Hobgoblin. Okay, and so the upshot of it is that Peter chases down Electro to this power plant, okay? And Gwen is trying to help him because they realize that in order to try to stop him, they have to do a certain thing with the electrical grid, which can kind of paralyze him long enough that they can put a little thing on his body that kind of like controls the electricity, the power in his body, okay? So that he can't just blast it. It's, he just, it just kind of like regulates it, basically. It kind of creates like a countercharge. And so they end up doing that. But then Harry shows up, grabs Gwen Stacy from behind, and Peter's like, what the hell are you doing, Harry? And he's like, oh, what am I doing? Oh, I'm going to shatter your world. And so he flies up, and of course Peter's chasing him, and he takes him up to the top of like this big like smokestack area, and he like drops Gwen, and Peter jumps after her to try to save her, and he shoots this web, and it goes out, and you can kind of see it. It's really cool because it's like it going out like this, and then it's like it's almost like it shoots out like this, and then it's almost like it opens up like a fist, like it's a hand like reaching out for her. Okay, but he was just like a couple fractions of a second too late. And so by the time the thing hits her, okay, and he starts to pull the tension, it's not enough. And she ends up against the ground, okay? And it kills her. And so Peter goes ballistic and basically beats Harry unconscious. And then during this whole time, you find out that Richard Parker had a secret laboratory in an old abandoned subway station. That's why I said subway in the first one instead of the sewer, because I was thinking about the second one, that he was using as a base, okay? And he was trying to collect information on Oscorp because he was trying to basically bring them down, because he was working for this company that was basically like producing these like really, really bad weapons and then selling them to bad guys. And he's like, this is not good. Like, we need to stop this. And so anyway, so Peter goes to Gwen's funeral, and of course he sees, Police Captain Stacy staring at him, and of course he goes into this like really deep depression. And finally, like, after a little while, they get to the point where, basically Aunt May comes to him and says, Peter, you've been in here for weeks now. You need to go back out into the world. People need you. And they turn on the TV and they see that there's this guy in this rhino suit, like, terrorizing the downtown area. And so this one little kid walks out there and he's got this, like, thing on. He's got this, like, Spider-Man outfit, like a Halloween costume on. And, of course, I think his name is Alexei, who's the rhino. He opens up the thing and he goes, what do we have here? Oh, a little kid who dressed like Spider-Man. Oh, I'm so scared, and he's like, I've spaced the real Spider-Man. Who do you think you are? And then I think he throws something at the kid, and then it's like, right before it hits the kid, it gets stopped by Spider-Man. And he goes, thanks, kid. I'll take it from here. And then it's like he like throws. I think it was a manhole cover is what he threw at him. So then he throws up the manhole cover. He shoots it with the web, and then he starts swinging it around. And then right before he hits him with it, it cuts to the credits. Because they were teasing the Sinister Six. Okay, in that movie, they had Doc Ock's tentacles. They had like a bunch of different, they had all the different people from the Sinister. I don't remember the whole Sinister Six, but they had everything for the Sinister Six right there. Okay, so they were teasing that they were going to make, like, the Amazing Spider-Man 3 was supposed to be like the Attack of the Sinister Six. Okay, where Harry was going to break out, and then he was going to get Otto Octavius, and he was going to get a bunch of other guys. He was going to bring them all together, and then they were going to fight, and then, they were going to, start doing this thing, and then Spider-Man was going to have to bring them down. Okay? Well, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 didn't do as well at the box office. In fact, that year, 2014, was kind of a downer year for Marvel, because I think Guardians of the Galaxy was about the only, outside of Ant-Man, was like one of the main movies in that phase that did really well. And a lot of people had gotten down on Kurtzman and Orci, who actually wrote and produced the Amazing Spider-Man duology, about, they had some things with Trek, they had some things with some other stuff that they'd done, and so people were like, Kurtzman and Orci, they suck, man. And so it kind of turned into this whole, thing, where they were just like, these guys suck, basically. And so it ended up kind of transitioning to, the movie didn't do that well at the box office. It was a good film, okay? I actually really like this sequel as opposed to the original Spider-Man 2. I actually really like this one because it really kind of shows how you can do a sympathetic villain really well. Because that's what, I mean, Electro in this movie, he didn't want it, okay? All he wanted was to be noticed. He wanted to be like Spider-Man. He just wanted to be noticed. And Spider-Man was getting through to him, and then shit went wrong, you know? So he just didn't have a chance. So anyway, the movie kind of just bleh. Okay? And so people were like, oh, Spider-Man's dead, you know? Nobody wants to bring Spider-Man to the MCU. Nobody wants to do anything with Spider-Man. And so Sony Pictures, Columbia Pictures, kind of said, okay, we need to bring Spider-Man into this Marvel Cinematic Universe. We really need to do that because we're hurting financially. And we're getting our asses handed to us by these, multi-billion-dollar returns at the box office from these Marvel movies. And we want a slice of that pie. So, it was kind of funny because there was a lot of people that were like, oh, they'll never bring Spider-Man into the MCU. I said, you watch. Because I had read an article where it basically said that Columbia Pictures and Columbia Pictures and Marvel Studios had opened up a dialogue, okay? And I was like, yeah, you watch. Because a lot of people were like, oh, they'll never let that happen. Yeah, they'll never let that happen. I'm like, yeah, they will. Yeah, they will. And so they basically said, we want to bring Spider-Man into the MCU. And a lot of people were like, great. And half the people were like, don't use Andrew Garfield. And the other half, like me, were like, dude, you've got a great Spider-Man. Use him. Well, Andrew Garfield went off to go make Hacksaw Ridge. And so he was busy. And he also wasn't sure if he wanted to come back and play the role again. And so they basically decided, well, we need to go find a new Spider-Man. So they went out, because they actually came out and said, we're bringing in a new Spider-Man. And we know what to do. Let us find the Spider-Man. So they went out and they found, here again, a young Brit by the name of Andrew Garfield. Or, not Andrew Garfield. Tom Holland. What am I doing? Derp. By the name of Tom Holland. Okay? And Tom Holland, they basically told him, they said, look, you're going to come in one movie, and then you'll have a solo movie, and then you'll be coming in the Avengers, and then you'll have another, and then you'll probably have at least another, 2 to 3 movies after that. Okay? And more appearances in, like, Avengers movies later on. So Tom Holland was like, sure, let's do it. So we heard that there was a new addition to Captain America Civil War. And people were like, new addition? Huh. Who could it be? And so they showed in the previews, they had this thing where he's like, where Tony Stark was like, okay, that's it. Under ruse! And then it's like you see this guy, like you see Cap's shield get taken from him, and his hands get bound, and then you see this guy land with the shield, and he's like, hey guys, and he's in the spider outfit, and you were like, yeah! It was awesome. Like that was like truly hype marketing right there. I mean, it was like thank you. Like you really made me want to go see this movie now, because after Captain America: The Winter Soldier, I wasn't sure if I wanted to see Captain America: Civil War. But then when I saw that preview and I saw that they were bringing in Spider-Man, I was like, oh hell yeah. And so he's not in the movie very long. This is the reason why I put it at the end of this one, is because he's not in this movie very long. He's got a few short scenes. But what scenes are there are really, really good. And I really, really, really like Tom Holland as Peter Parker. He is an amazing Peter Parker / Spider-Man, because he really gets, like Andrew Garfield did, he really gets that sort of talking during battle and, like, you know, the awkwardness of Peter Parker and that kind of stuff. He really understands that part of the character, and he brings that into the role. And I really, really, really like that about his character. It is very, very well done. And it was very well written in this movie. And this was actually the movie that got, well, not only Marcus and Feely, but the Russo brothers, Joe and Anthony Russo, to direct Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame, because they were like, wow, you know, and because after Joss Whedon did Age of Ultron, he left. He was like, I'm done. I'm not going to do another one. And he took off, and they kind of like were like, well, who do we get? And so they asked around to some of the different directors, and the Russo brothers kind of stood up and went, hey, we can do it. And they were like, well, but you've only done one movie. And he went, and then they were like, yeah, so, you know, we have the next Captain America, right? And we want to make it Civil War, right? Let us direct that, and if you like it, if it makes money, then let us do the Avengers. So this was kind of like Avengers 2.5, okay? Because it had everybody in it at that time. It had Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson, Sebastian Stan, Anthony Mackie, Don Cheadle, Jeremy Renner, Chadwick Boseman, Paul Bettany, Elizabeth Olsen, with Daniel Bruhl and Tom Holland. Okay? So it had everybody in it. Okay? And Chadwick Boseman, R.I.P., buddy. We hardly knew you. So it was an excellent film. It was an excellent telling of the Civil War storyline without having to go, 5 or 6 movies. Okay? Or 3 or 4 movies, or 2 movies. They were able to tell the plot of Civil War very succinctly, yet still retain that that MCU flavor that we've come to know so far. It had a lot of the humor, had a lot of the, action, it had a lot of the stuff that we were used to out of these characters. Nobody's acting out of character because everybody's in character. The writers, Marcus and Feely, really did a good job of writing every single character the way they were supposed to be. Okay? And I really, really, really enjoy this film. It is one of my absolute all-time favorite movies in the MCU. And when I want something just to put on, just to sit back and relax, I just pop in Civil War, because it is an amazing film. And Tom Holland, it's really funny. Like when they had the big battle at the airport, this is really where kind of Tom Holland is kind of a part of it. There's one scene of him in the apartment with his Aunt May, which is played by Marissa Tomei, and we'll get into her a little bit later. In the next part, I should say. Not a little bit later, but we'll get into her with the next part. Tony Stark just kind of shows up in his apartment, and he's like, Peter Parker's like, you're Tony Stark. and he's like, and it's so funny because he looks at Marissa Tomei and he's like, it's hard to believe she's somebody's aunt. And she's like, well, we come in all shapes and sizes. And I think it's because normally we'd been given Aunt May as the older female, right? Like the elderly female. Like Aunt May in the original comics and in the original movie was played, Rosemary Harris played her, but she's always been portrayed as an older woman, like silver hair and, wrinkles and all that kind of stuff. Not being ageist, I'm just saying that's how they portray her. And then, of course, we had Sally Field, wonderful actress, but she was also on the older side of, that sort of, thing. To be an aunt, be more like grandma, in my opinion. Instead of Aunt May, it would have been Grandma May, kind of a thing. But when they did this, they had Marissa Tomei, who is in her late 40s, early 50s. She's not that old, okay? So it was a radical change from what they had before. I think it was why Tony Stark had that line. It's like, wow, this is different. And so, and so basically, Tony is like, showing some of the videos of, Peter being Spider-Man. Because in this one and in the Home trilogy, they don't actually explore the origins of Spider-Man, because as the writers of the Home trilogy said, we know his origin story now. It's been told to us twice. It's been jammed down our throats. We know how he becomes Spider-Man. Okay? We don't need to see that every single time. So, basically during the fight, it's really funny because Paul Rudd, who plays Ant-Man, basically, like, becomes Giant Man. And Don Cheadle's like, oh, okay, Tiny Dude's big now. And then he comes in and he goes, and then it's like, Peter Parker's like, hey, have any of you guys seen that really old movie, Empire Strikes Back, where they're on that ice planet and they're trying to take down those walkers? That made me feel really old, because I was actually born in the same year that movie came out. And I'm just sitting in the theater just laughing my ass off, because it's like, it's like these guys are like, how old is this kid? And Tony Stark's like, well, I didn't, check his birth certificate. He's on the younger side. It's like, he's a teenager. He's in school. To him, it's an older movie because, it came out way before he was born. So it's an older movie. And so it makes people like me feel really ancient when you say that. Because I'm only 42. I mean, it's like, I'm sitting here going, oh, God. Because at the time, I was only like 36. And I'm going, geez, come on, man. Movie's not that old. Like 36 years. It's not like, I mean, technically you probably could call it a classic. But it's not like, to me, like, old is like, watching a John Wayne film. Or watching, like, something from like the 50s, or, hell, like, to me, an older film is like The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind. Okay, those to me are older films because they came out in the 30s and 40s. Okay, that's what I'm saying. And I know that my parents, if they heard me talking about this, they'd be like, oh my God, those are not older films. Because my parents were born in the 40s. So, to them, it's not older films. But to me, it is, because it's 30 some odd years before I was born, plus. Okay, because, like, you look at movies like Gone with the Wind and that kind of stuff. Those movies were old when my parents were alive. So, that's what I'm talking about. It's like, but it's just funny that he does it that way, but then they're like, hey, the kid's onto something. So then, it's like Peter tries to wrap up Paul Rudd's, Scott Lang's legs, and then Don Cheadle comes in and, like, punches, uppercuts him, and, they kind of knock him down and all this kind of stuff. And then, it was pretty neat. I really liked it. And it was funny because at the very end of the film, during the tag scene, he's playing around with this little wristband that Tony gave him, and it projects this little, like, Spider-Man icon on the ceiling. And it's got some different stuff, and he's looking at it, and then it's like Aunt May comes in, and so he kind of, goes down, he's like, oh, and she's like, so you told me? Because, like, there's this part where he's fighting with Captain America, And right at the very end, Captain America's like, right at the end of the fight, Captain America's like, "You got heart, kid. Where are you from?" He's like, "Queens." And he's like, because he's like trying to hold up this one thing, he's like, "Queens." And he goes, "Brooklyn." And then he runs off. And so Aunt May comes in and she goes, "So you said you got beat up by a guy from Brooklyn?" And he's like, "Yeah, you should have seen his buddy. He was huge." Giant man, It's like that's what I mean. It's like the humor in it is spot on, like the on point vintage Marvel humor. It is perfect. And that, like I said, that's why I love watching this film. It is so good. I cannot recommend watching these films enough, okay? The original Spider-Man trilogy is good for what it is. The Amazing Spider-Man duology is also good for what it is, okay? And I say that because, when we look at things, when we look at how... When we break down a lot of these films, okay, I'm giving you, at the end of the day, I'm giving you my opinion on it, okay? And I'm telling you whether or not it's good. And for some people, they may not be that good. You might be one of those people watching this, and you might be going, it's kind of sucked. Give it another watch, okay? This movie, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, okay? I used to think it sucked. I did. I thought it sucked. I thought it was the worst movie I'd ever seen. Then I sat down and started watching it. And I realized just how amazing that movie really is. And it's the same way with the Amazing Spider-Man movies. I went into them comparing them to the original Spider-Man trilogy. But then I realized they're their own movies. They have nothing to do with the original Spider-Man trilogy. Okay? And so I would say this. Give them another watch. Okay? And do watch this movie. And do watch the Home trilogy. Because the Spider-Man Home trilogy is absolutely amazing. So when we come back on the third part of this Spider-Man retrospective, we're going to go over the Home trilogy and the events of Infinity War and Endgame. So, smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you thought about these movies. I do want to read comments about it. I do want to know your thoughts on the movies. And, just kind of let me know what you think. And when we come back on the next one, we're going to get into the Home trilogy, and we're going to talk about Tom Holland's run as Spider-Man, and we're going to get into it. If you have not seen Spider-Man No Way Home, you are going to want to watch that movie before you watch my retrospective, because I'm going to have a lot of spoilers for that one. So I hope that you will join me for that, and as we say, we will see you on the next one.